Welcome to this episode of Religion and American Life, a podcast of the Blasey Center for Religion and American Public Life at Boston College. I am Father Mark Massa, the director of the Blasey Center, and today's podcast host. This podcast is an initiative of the Blasey Center's commitment to connecting a community of scholars, policymakers, media, and religious leaders in conversation and scholarly reflection around issues at the intersection of religion and American public life. Today, we are quite happily joined by the Superintendent of Catholic Schools in the Archdiocese of Boston, Eileen McLaughlin, to discuss the future of Catholic education. Educated in the Archdiocese Schools of Boston, Mount St. Joseph Academy, and Our Lady of the Presentation Grammar School, she began her career as a Catholic educator at St. Anne's School in Somerville, teaching grades 6 through 8. In her previous role with the Lynch Leadership Academy, she planned and facilitated professional development for more than 20 Catholic school leaders in the Archdiocese of Boston. She also serves on the Providence Alliance for Catholic Teachers, which is out of Providence College in Rhode Island. She led Mount Alvernia School from 2000 to 2019 as head of school, and her most recent position was a leadership coach with the Lynch Leadership Academy here at Boston College. Welcome, Eileen. We're delighted to have you.
It is wonderful to be with you, and it is wonderful to hear you speak about my life in that way, because each mark along that journey has really influenced the person that I've become, and it's a delight to hear you speak of it.
You are quite well liked and respected, Superintendent. I did some reading on the internet before. So from where you sit, if you were, I hope this doesn't happen anytime soon, okay? I hope you stay in your current position for a very long time. But let's say you decide to do something else for a while, and you meet your successor as Superintendent of Catholic Schools for the Archdiocese of Boston. What would you tell her or him as the single biggest challenge and the single biggest opportunity facing Catholic schools today?
Okay, I love the way you frame that as meeting my successor, because I do think in leadership, it's similar to my role as a parent, as a mother to two children. When they leave my home and go someplace else, I want to make sure that they are cared for and challenged, and that they are fostered and nurtured in such a way that they grow into the fullest version of themselves. And I feel that way about the work that I'm doing now. I felt that way about the work that I did at Boston College, at Lynch Leadership Academy, and at Mount Alvernia before that, and in my classroom before that. I wanted what was good to continue. So in terms of the biggest challenges, I think it is right and just to look at the funding model, right, for Catholic education. It is, as we employ, more and more lay teachers and lay leaders, and as more and more families, need to pay tuition, and the cost of living in itself gets more and more challenging. I think the greatest challenge we face is just the funding model. I think it's really good to identify what the challenge is, because I was an ELA teacher, not a math teacher, but I think when you identify the variables and identify the constants in a problem, you can work towards a solution, or at least a methodology to how you're going to get at the solution. So I think that would probably be the greatest challenge. In terms of the greatest opportunity, I think it's worthy of investment, right? Catholic education at its heart is good at what it does. It's also, I think we encountered this especially during the COVID years here in Boston. I don't know that agile is a word that I would use, that many people use to describe, Catholic institutions. But I think what we found in the COVID era was, there was an agility, and our connection to mission really clearly identified, okay, here are our values. We know the problem. We're going to try and get at how we live according to our values and and answer the call. So I think that's the opportunity, like the quality of Catholic education.
But you said Catholic schools are very good at what they do. Do you want to unpack that a little bit? What is it that they do that they're so excellent at?
So, I mean, our primary purpose for existing is education, right? That's Catholic schools exist to educate. And sometimes I have pushback from people who say, well, no, we are to evangelize. And I say, in the same way that a Catholic hospital is meant to heal, Catholic schools are meant to educate. And as factors in the evangelization of the evangelization work of the church. So what we do is help in human formation, right? So there's a faith component, but there's also, it's one of the things that kept me in Catholic education as a teacher. My intention was to teach in Catholic schools for a few years as a means of giving back. And then from there, I was going to go to a public school district where I thought I would, earn a pension at least. And what kept me as a Catholic school teacher really was there was a level of engagement. I always felt engaged as a professional, as a Catholic school teacher. And there was a degree of agency that I knew my peers and colleagues who were in public schools who might be answering to a very prescribed curriculum didn't have access to. And so what we do well is education. And that means creating a professional environment for the teachers in the community, as well as an environment that's going to educate the age group we have in front of us.
That's very well said. As you know, I'm a historian, so I think historically. So let's talk about the history of Catholic education. Catholic schools today exist in a different world than the world that they were created in. I mean, Catholic schools began, especially in places like Boston, to educate the children of immigrants in Boston, largely Irish immigrants, and then it became more diverse. And today, the clientele, I presume you know much better than I, the clientele is much more varied, much more pluralistic than those things. And part of, I think, the older model of Catholic education, and most Catholic education was parochial, literally, that is, they were attached to specific parishes. But part of that parochial education was to keep the children of immigrants faithful to the church and give them skill sets that would enable them to thrive in a Boston environment that was not always welcoming to Boston Catholics. How has the model changed? In other words, given the state you're in, and I would like to have you talk a little bit about what is the context for Catholic education today, and how is that context different than, say, the 1830s and 40s when so many of these schools were created?
I think the wonderful thing as students of history is that we know while much changes, much remains the absolute same. And so, yes, you're right. We were founded to serve an immigrant population. And I think in many parts of the Archdiocese, we are still doing that. We were founded to keep the faith. And I think we're continuing to do that, but in a remarkably in a nuanced way. My experience of my own Catholic education was that my parents, Tom and Mary Ann, sent me to Catholic school and my siblings, the 5 siblings, to Catholic school in order to keep the faith alive. My experience as a teacher and as a head of school and now as a parent is that parents might be choosing Catholic schools for a different reason than my parents did in the 70s and the 80s. And yet the influence of the domestic church and on the domestic church is still very much so the work of Catholic education. But one of the beautiful things that I experienced and that I see now is that so often grace, Spirit moves families to choose Catholic education, and then the children of those families grow in their faith and they bring that home with them. And so what I am experiencing and bearing witness to is many families who had might have grown distant from the church or just not been engaged at all in the church, who have children who are coming home to them and talking about their prayer intentions, who are talking about their methods of prayer. And it is the way in which Christ is at work in our world. And so my parents chose Catholic education to sort of keep us in the Catholic formation. And now I see Christ's work as really working through the children of Catholic schools to bring their parents in closer to Christ.
Yeah.
And still, and we're doing that whether you are born of a marginalized community that needs skills, as well as an understanding of the corporal works of mercy and just how to be human, not how to do the work, but how to be the human. Whether you're from a marginalized community or whether you're from a community that is a privileged community, we need to build an understanding of what Christ is calling each of us to. Me and you, people who we like, people who we don't like, we know that they were created for union with God. And that's a piece of what Catholic schools have always been about and are still about today.
You're familiar with primary and secondary education. My world is the higher ed world. And I would say there's something like 227 Catholic colleges and universities in the United States. I would say there are levels and there are styles of Catholic higher education. The Catholic university is not necessarily the same. And we talk about various styles of Catholic higher education and the various audiences that they address. Is it a similar thing in terms of Catholic primary and secondary schools?
Yeah, I think there's a rich diversity, as there should be. I remember as I was maybe like in my late adolescence, and then throughout my 20s, I grew up and I continued to live in the neighborhood that I was raised in. And so the parish that I was born into was the parish where I was worshiping. And at some point along the line, I was growing and changing, and I was no longer a child, but this was the parish of my childhood. And I remember my mother sort of saying to me, you don't have to go to Mass here, but you do have to go to Mass because that's the value of our family. And that was just the expectation. I appreciate people with clear expectations. So I began, looking at what the parish was close to us, that, to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west, and found a place to worship that suited me at that point in my life. And it happens to be the parish where I still worship today, where my husband and I were married, where our children were baptized and have received sacraments. So I think the same is true of Catholic education. There needs to be a variety, a diversity, because we are a diverse people, and we need communities that reflect us, and also communities that are different from us.
Boston, I came to Boston College 15 years ago from Fordham University in New York. And Boston is the city. I'd lived in Boston for a while before then. Boston, like New York, is a city where when you ask people where they're from, they tend to give you the name of the parish. Like when I first got to Fordham, I was out talking to a Jewish colleague whom I knew was Jewish. And I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Sacred Heart." I said, "Sacred Heart? Like, what are you talking
I love that because my mother, whenever, like by the time we got to high school and knew people from outside of our parish, because in an elementary school, you only knew people from your parish. My mother would always say to the kids, like, "What parish are you from?" And we were like, "Mom, stop. Ask, like, don't do that." But it actually is, it's super helpful because you can be from Dorchester, but I actually do want to know whether you're from St. Anne's or St. Brendan's.
about? It makes a difference, and Bostonians know the difference. So you immediately have sort of a gestalt, sort of what the parish is like, what the neighborhood's like. So at least initially, most of the children in Catholic primary and secondary schools were children of immigrants. Talk about that a little bit in Boston today. What percentage, I presume, and I don't know this, so I'm asking you, what percentage of students in Catholic schools today are themselves children of immigrants? And how have those immigrant groups changed?
It is significant, the number of, because I do think as immigrants come to the United States, one of the means by which they create family and create community is in the church, right? That's a reality. And one of the places that, because of our rich history, there is a welcoming nature to, and so immigrants of varying backgrounds find their way to us, whether they are people of the Catholic faith or not. And that is a wonderful thing about our Catholic reputation and our history. In terms of the actual numbers, you're giving me a bit of homework because I should be able to say that off the top of my head, and I'm not able to. But what I will say is, it is impressive. There are some schools where, you know, a school of 400 students will say, well, there's, you know, approximately 27 countries that are represented in these, where their families are from, and these are first generation. And I'm like, 27 countries. I'd be hard pressed to name 27 countries. So I do think one of the things that makes me very proud of Boston, the Boston Archdiocese and our Catholic schools, is that we are truly reflective of the population. We are not sort of a, you know, we are richly diverse.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I have colleagues here at Boston College who sent their own children to a local Catholic, a very good local Catholic school named St. Columkills, and they say that the children there. I was just talking to one of my colleagues about this. The children come from family where some amazing amount of languages are spoken at home. So
it's remarkable. St. Columkills is one of those places. I now work in Braintree at the Pastoral Center. And one of the things when I first was called to discern whether or not I would move into leadership, I was really heartsick for a long time over leaving the classroom because that distance from students I felt was going to be too big of a burden for me to bear. So one of my favorite things is finding a way to visit schools and being in the community, A, because they are always remarkably welcoming, and B, because you really do see where the Catholic Church is an agent of change in our world and has been historically. I don't think we tell our story proudly enough. We don't promote enough the work of Catholic schools as a force for equity and inclusion, really, in our world. But I think the sisters and the religious orders that founded our schools and the dioceses that supported our schools, the parishes that supported our schools, were doing that before it was ever in vogue.
right now, in the old days, you just touched on this. In the old days, Catholic schools could rely on the talents and labor of religious women, of nuns and sisters. Sisters, canonically, I mean, sisters in the world aren't nuns, but we won't go into all that. But a lot about religious orders of women to teach. Now, those numbers have changed dramatically since 1965, and now Catholic schools rely much more on talented lay people. So, how do you, as a superintendent of a very large and important archdiocese, how do you talk about that to the people, the laity who show up to teach in the schools? Like, how do you bring them into the vision of what they are about and who are they replacing?
One of the great things about working at the Pastoral Center is that I don't have to do all of that. And so one of the people who I've engaged with here is Violet Hurst, who is the archivist for the Archdiocese of Boston. She is a fascinating woman and a tremendous source and resource for me. And she talks really beautifully about the rich history of our Catholic schools and the men and women who founded them and staffed them for so long. And most recently this summer, she spoke to a group of new Catholic teachers, and it was really a call to action for them that they are carrying on that legacy, so there's that piece of it, to know that I am attuned to that partly because I'm a product of it. But if you came to Catholic education having not been formed by it, then you culturally may just not know it. So I think there is an obligation for us as sort of I will call us a school district, even though that's not what we are, but like as a central office, there is a responsibility on our part to evangelize, to communicate with people what that is. The other thing that I talked about sort of the heart sickness of leaving students further behind, but one of the great consolations that came at that time also was seeing the way in which Catholic schools become an evangelizing force for faculty. and for their families as well. This has been something that I have borne witness to and seen beautifully. So I take what you're saying very seriously, because I'm realizing teachers of this generation don't have the formation that those who were in religious life had. And that was a tremendous benefit to how they were members of a Catholic school community. So there is an obligation for us on our end as a central office to, and as an archdiocese, to find ways to educate and to evangelize in the best form of the word, just to introduce people to Christ so that they can be more aware of what it is that they're being called to do and how Christ is working in their lives.
Boston College is blessed to have a really first-class school, the Lynn School of Education, which is a wonderful school.
I am a product of back when it was just Campion Hall School of Ed.
I can always tell when you have a Lynch student. Now, my experience is that Lynch provides, I don't know, I think I can safely say the majority of their graduates don't go into Catholic education.
Mm-hmm.
It provides a significant number of lay teachers who leave Boston College and then start a career in Catholic schools. Is that sort of like fact universal? In other words, are most Catholic school teachers themselves products of Catholic education, or do a lot of them come from public education?
My inclination is no, that there is that, because I just don't think we could populate in that way. It is another interesting data collection point for me to go, and it's the way a good conversation always leads to a little bit more research on the other end. It's like good historical research leads to more questions, not answers. So my inclination is to say that many of us are products of Catholic education, but I would hasten to guess that it's at minimum 50-50. And so I think there are some, the popular opinions of the popular narratives about what Catholic school is, and then the lived experience of what Catholic school is. There's a Venn diagram. There's some overlap, but it's also different. So I do think there is an opportunity. I think also, even if you are a product of Catholic education, the school it comes back to the diversity. The school in which you were educated and the manner in which I was educated by both lay and religious, and yet by the time I was teaching, it was more lay than religious. And now I think it's the faculties we're looking at are really largely lay. It's shifting, but there's an opportunity to sort of lean into that and see it as the work that we've been called to do.
We started off about this, and you mentioned that perhaps the greatest challenge is financing this important work of the church. Do you find that most Catholics in parishes understand how important Catholic education is, and do you find them willing to support an education that costs some money? All the studies I see say that Catholic schools are much more efficient in their use of money than public education. That much higher percentage of money goes directly to help students and not in overhead.
We can do more with a roll of quarters than anyone else ever imagined. So I do think one of the things is that I've really been, again, blessed to bear witness to. When I was a high school principal, there were many more sleepless nights, because there was this kind of, will we find the support that we need to? Because there was always this growing divide between the cost to educate and the cost of tuition, right? What has been a real blessing in the 18 months that I've been superintendent is to meet with a tremendous number of philanthropists who really do see the value. And the funny thing about philanthropists is that they have often made their fortunes in investing, right? So they look at return on investment. They look at, are you doing with the money that we invest, the thing that you say you're doing, does it yield? And they find that indeed it does yield what it does. And so I've found that there is a tremendous support for that. Likewise, I think I'll speak as a Catholic school parent. It's not easy, right? Like it is, it is a significant amount of our family's income that goes towards our son's education. And yet, the further into it we get, the more I realize I wouldn't want it to be any other way. Like, so then we absolutely work to find this way to make it happen. And I see the return on the investment. I see the impact. Again, Rob and I sent our children to Catholic school because we are Catholic and we wanted them to be in a Catholic environment, as my parents did and as his parents did. And they come home at the end of the night and we sit at the kitchen table and I listen to the things they say now as 12 and 13-year-old boys. And my heart swells because this is way more than the return on the investment I thought I would get. They are really developing into fine human beings. And at a time in our world where what we need are fine human beings, I feel like we've invested not only in them and not only in our family, but also in the world. So I think we could probably tell that story better.
I can't imagine higher praise from a parent. So it's like, that's amazing. So that's quite moving, actually. What do you think are the innovations as a superintendent who oversees how many Catholics?
There are 92 Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Boston, about over 33,000 students. And to your point, that ranges from small parish schools to schools that were owned and operated by the Archdiocese of Boston, but now have boards and presidents who govern them, and schools that were founded by religious orders. And so that are a little bit more distant from the Archdiocese, but are still Catholic.
What have been the most, in your experience, the most important innovations in education in terms of either theory or practice? Is it computer stuff? Is it AI? So
I'll come back to our origin story again, because I think one of the things that we can learn from the women and men who founded Catholic schools is that they were great surveyors of the societies in which they lived, and they discerned what the society needed, and then they provided a community in which they could foster that, right? And so I think when we are looking at innovation, again, I think once innovations get named, they're almost passé, right? Like it's already too late to call that an innovation because it's been around for a little bit. I think what I feel called to in this work right now is very much so a sort of a recommitment to our Catholic identity in Scripture, in the Gospels, in the teachings of the Church. I think the corporal works of mercy are just so rich in, like, again, if every human in the world lived in relation to the corporal works of mercy, then I really could foresee an end to all of our problems, right? So a piece of me thinks that the innovation is really just being in tune with the society in which we're living, and being aware of wanting to address the needs and provide a support, because children are vulnerable, right? They are the most vulnerable members of our society in a lot of ways. And so to provide a sense of stability, like none of this feels like innovation, right? I'm not talking about it, but I am talking about, in order to use the tool that is AI, the innovation is being formed, right? In terms of faith, in terms of human formation. So this is less about the innovation of tools and more about how we as humans know ourselves, know what we're created for, know what we're called to, and then how we are going to use the tools for the purpose that which they are given to us, which is union with God.
So if you were to look into your crystal ball, I presume you have a crystal ball somewhere in your office, right? If you were to look into it, what would you predict, say, 10 years from now for Catholic schools in Boston? What would you say?
Oh, we will be thriving. And we are right now. Like, I think what I see in 10 years from now is that people will universally understand that we are a thriving entity. I think, again, there's been appropriately, demographics have shifted, from the 60s and 70s to the 80s. Families are smaller. And so what I'll speak specifically for the Church of Boston. We've seen a lot of school closures, and I think the school closures over the past 20 years can tell a story of decline, right? When in fact, it really is a story of right sizing in some ways. There's decline. There is the reality. I've lived here my whole life. I've lived through all of the challenges of the Boston Catholic Church. And yet, even amidst the closures, we are still doing what we set out to do. Our purpose is education, and we are educating. And we are doing it well. So when I look into my crystal ball 10 years from now, I know that experience, and I speak to it so confidently because I've never been outside of it, right? I've always seen the evidence. I've lived the evidence in my own personal experience, in my professional experience, in my experience as a Catholic school parent. I would love for society to know the evidence of the strength of Catholic schools, and I see that as being possible in the next 10 years.
So Eileen, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. It is a wonderful opportunity always to speak about the things we love. So thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Religion and American Life, a podcast by the Boise Center for Religion and American Public Life at Boston College. For more information on the work of the Boise Center, the Center's schedule of events, or to listen to other episodes of this podcast, please visit our website at bc.edu/BOISI.